Thank you very much, Amal. I think we have about 10 to 15 minutes. We started about 5 minutes late, so we have, let's say, 15 minutes. I'd like to take some comments or questions. We first take some questions, and then we have a very short response by the panel. Let's say 1 minute for each one. All right? Go ahead.
Actually, I have 3 comments each. One of the 3 speakers will be, of course, short because lack of time. Just a short comment to your knowledge both theoretical and empirical concerning the there is a growing body of literature, both theoretical and empirical, on the dysfunctions of trust among negotiators who represent rival sides, such as the Israeli and Palestinian. And if you're interested, I can send it to you. But the point, this literature strongly support your point. I think it's very interesting, including not only negotiators, but for example, all the NGOs, like people-to-people organizations that had not succeed to have the spillover effect, throughout the general public. And this is, I think, what it could be.
I just want to interfere for a minute, because we have so little time. Let us suffice with one question, and let's give the others some chance.
I'll do the job. I don't want to say that the chairman...
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Because there are so many others that want to say, and we have only 10 minutes. So I think I'm doing my job quite well.
To Walid Saleh, we have explored this issue of where Israel wants, or Israeli wants to see themselves.
Can't hear you.
Where Israeli wants to see themselves, situating or closer to the West or the Middle East. And we explored it on 3 dimensions: economic, political, and cultural. And on all 3 dimensions, the Israeli clearly prefer the West over the East. I want to mention that this was done before the arousal of the Arab Spring. I guess that had we done this research today, this trend would be even stronger. My last comment is to Amal.
I have to. So just please
And this question goes to Yossi Beilin. You mentioned that the negotiators actually act as lawyers for which side. This is one thing you didn't make quite clear, and I think you did so on purpose. I didn't hear that you said that the negotiators are acting as lawyers. Who do they represent? Do the Israeli negotiators try to be lawyers presenting the Palestinian side to the Israelis, or are they presenting their own side towards the Palestinians and vice versa?
There was a question there.
I would like Yossi Beilin to hear his comments about the issue of settlements with Prime Minister Rabin. I think that this is a demonstration of asymmetric negotiations. The Palestinians had no choice. Actually, Rabin put a veto on it. So the Palestinians didn't really trust the Israelis. Rabin said no, there will be no commitment on anything that relates to the final status settlement agreement. So I believe that between a very weak society and leadership as the Palestinian and the Israelis, it's a kind of what I think Meron Benveniste called it a coexistence between a horse and a rider. So this is a trust between a horse and a rider.
Other questions or remarks? I think we take only 1 or 2, and then we will take the chance.
I'll just try to make it very short. Nobody in these 2 days, and maybe it also implies something that I'm turning to the panel that has Palestinian, Israeli, and other. in the group is nobody's mentioned the sulha, that many Israelis in Hebrew you say osim sulha, they think it's forgiving and finished. But people who know, how can one bring a very, very systematic system of building trust, etc., and forgiving into the political process?
There was some last question.
In a poison.
I have two comments. One is for Professor Jamal. You mentioned that the bridge defines these two banks, but the thing is, Dr. Bailin mentioned that as negotiators they become one unit. So they were basically not defining the banks, they were actually defining themselves, which is pretty much working on the existentialist point of view. On that matter, this is more for Dr. Bailin, it looks like the whole procedure was kind of a Pygmalion effect. You created something and then fell in love with it and tried to, I don't know, to sustain it on that point. You have mentioned that Prime Minister Sharon was pretty much out there with his "I don't trust," and this is a very much substantial, very strong point as someone who's coming into a negotiation. I do not trust. This is my ground. This is where I stand, and I kind of questioning myself, of course, which methodology is better. As one as this is my opponent and I have a gap between him. I'm not really trying to overcome it, but I'm trying to stand my own ground, and this is our negotiation further on. Or is it building that bridge and basically defining it its own measure? On that note, and this is the last comment, this is something
Thank you very much. I think we should really keep it like this now, because according to the original time, the session should have ended now. But I think because we started 5 minutes late, I would like to give each one of you a chance of, let's say, one and a half minutes, and I'll skip my summary. So let's just hear you. We start with them. I'd like to start with them. Yeah. And then we go to...
Well, I'm going to relate to the Sulha issue more than ideas because time is short. Yeah, it could be definitely a tool to promote the relation between the two sides, and it's a traditional way of negotiating a solution that could actually meet what I said. Because we are speaking about two tribes, I think tribal sulha could be very important here, which doesn't mean actually apology only, but also negotiating a certain way of building trust between the two communities. But given the fact that Israeli society denies its Oriental origins, I don't think this could work. This needs, two partners in this regard.
Well, about the lawyers, and the lawyers of whom, the usual way is to see it as lawyers of the decision makers, or to be more accurate, the Prime Minister. Of course, this is not the accurate way, because especially if the negotiators are people who are representing very clear political views. They are not the multiplication of the Prime Minister. They have their own ideas, and this is one of the reasons why trust is so important between the Prime Minister and them, because he doesn't trust them in many cases. They are people from their own, they are not the real lawyers. It looks like a lawyer, and this is why the Prime Ministers like so much to have lawyers, real lawyers, in the negotiations, because they tend to trust them. They don't have their own views, but they only have clients. As to the question of Rabin and the settlements, the negotiations were asymmetric, and most of the time, negotiations like that are asymmetric. You don't find real, maybe between the United States and the Soviet Union, you had symmetric, in a way, negotiations, which eventually was shown as unsymmetric, asymmetric negotiations. So you don't have symmetric negotiation, and you don't have to hope for something like this, because it is not realistic and not even needed. What is needed is to relate to the other side as equal, even if you have more guns or whatever, which is not always the case. Now, with Rabin, there was a very strong point here for him, because one of the very first government resolutions was to stop building, as you know, as you wrote it. It was not implemented as we wanted it to be implemented, but the idea of our government was to stop it totally. And we had a majority for that. This is why, at that point, it seemed to us as it's not such a huge demand from the other side. I mean, we did not come to build more settlements. Why do you want to poke in our eyes and to say, yeah, you have to say that you will never build settlements if in few years we are going to have a permanent agreement, and by then we will not build. This is why, I mean, I'm defending myself.
Yeah.
But it seemed to us then very natural, and apparently this was also the way it was seen by the Palestinians. It is not that they did not have any other option. There is always the option of a crisis.
Because you never met Yigal Amir at that time.
Yeah, but there was no crisis in the negotiations because of that. There were other crises, by the way, in the Oslo process, so the original one, but not on the issue of the settlement. And about Sharon did not use the view of I don't trust him as a position for the negotiations. This is the whole point. He used it in order not to negotiate at all. The utmost he did was, at the beginning of his first term, to send his beloved son to talk with Arafat in the modern democratic Israel, which is not tribal and doesn't need sultan. So he sent his son, and people said, even Sharon is sending his son, big deal. But he never negotiated with them. He did as a foreign minister, because he was obliged by Netanyahu, but as a prime minister, he never negotiated with them because he did not trust them. And between this point of view and the view which says, there are people like myself, and theoretically the issue is soluble if you believe that it is your national interest and it is their national interest. You may be wrong. You may be wrong, and the gaps might be too big. But the original idea is to say, I trust them as human beings who are not worse and not better than myself. And as such, I'm ready to negotiate with them, even if I'm not saying that I trust everything and that I can really blindly accept whatever they say. But they are human beings, and with human beings, usually you can negotiate.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone here who contributed.